Bueno, Kaixo, arratsaldeon guztioi, buenas tardes a todas y bienvenidas a esta nueva sesión de conversaciones, en este caso conversaciones.
Welcome to this new film talk, which are within the NEST program. And well, today we're particularly happy to have here the director, Jane Schoenbrun. You could see her third long feature, which was debuted here 2 days ago, premiered. And like always, we'll talk first, and then we'll open a question and answer session. Thank you
for accepting the invitation. I would like to start with something that happened on Monday when we were here in the premiere of the film, because I think that everyone was really connected to the film, and something really special happened in the Q&A, because it became a sort of sharing experiences, and I think that, yeah, that's quite unique. And I would like to ask you if this is something that has happened to you before in the other premieres you have made, and why do you think it is?
Yeah, it's been happening all year. It's quite moving. I try to make films. I talked about this on Monday. I try to make films from very internal places. I don't think I start with story. I don't think I start with narrative. I also don't think I start with a message, or I need to get people to understand this thing that I understand. It's really starting with something oblique, something kind of liminal and amorphous, but that I feel. Usually it's a mystery to me for a long time, and part of the process of building the film from maybe just an idea or an image involves finding out why it stuck in my head, and usually somewhere around year one, at 1 year of sort of developing something obliquely in my head, I start to understand how the project is personal and how it relates to whatever mystery I'm exploring in my life. I don't think of it exactly as therapy, but I think it's sort of it's a very internal process. And actually in my creative process, things like story, narrative, character, all of that is incredibly important, but all of that comes very late for me. I think of it as Occam's razor, the simplest way to make something that can be generative and ask the questions and engage with an audience emotionally in the way that I'm trying to. I know what the feeling I want to express is, and I'm hoping that I can come up with the aesthetics and images and narratives and pacing and characters and all of the things that you get to do when you make a film to conjure whatever it is I'm trying to conjure. And my first film, I've made 2 narrative feature films. My first film was called We're All Going to the World's Fair, and with that film, I for years was obsessed with this idea of making something about this internet community, and I really didn't understand what I was looking for until very, very late in the creative process. And then I realized that what I was exploring had a lot to do with my own gender struggles and dysphoria, and this feeling of looking for yourself online in the obscurity of the screen. But it didn't come from that place, right? I didn't say from the beginning, oh, no, I'm going to make a movie about dysphoria. I didn't even know this word when I started working on that film. And then when the film premiered, and by that time I had started to transition, and I understood myself as a trans filmmaker, and I understood the film as trans, but I was so worried that people would be like, this is bad. That's not how, it was very early on, so I was very insecure, but a lot of that insecurity was about, that I didn't do good representation, or responsible representation, or I didn't have the characters look in the camera and say it's okay if you're trans, And then when the film premiered, I mean, most people who weren't trans didn't really understand what was trans about it. And then the people who did were like, oh my God, this is capturing like a wisp of smoke, like something that I've felt internally that, I've never seen like expressed in this form, in this medium. And I think that was very inspiring to me, and people did have reactions to that film, but I saw the TV Glow shortly after that experience of the movie premiering, or actually, I guess shortly before, but I think I knew what I was trying to do. I had sort of built myself this long and specific, and I think very much like bespoke creative process. And so going into this film, I knew what I was wanting to talk about from pretty early on. I knew that this was a film about figuring out one's identity and coming to terms with all of the ways that what you had thought of as home was actually in many ways the thing that was keeping you from yourself. But I was very, I think I was very careful, again, not to like speak from outside of that process and really to just try to conjure an emotional experience that I was going through and conjure it in ways that were using the medium, using film in all of the ways that film is a way to communicate. And it's been, again, very, very gratifying to see the impact of, like, rather than setting out to be like, I'm going to make, I don't think one should think of film as like social impact. You don't make a film to like change politics or something. You make a film to explore mysteries with people. But with this film, I think I was tapping into something that was certainly very raw and emotional and also like uncharted for me, and seeing other people react that way to it has been incredible. Since the film premiered in January, it has to be hundreds, if not like 1,000 people who've told me personally or I've seen online talking about the film really helping them on their own transition journeys, and they're understanding themselves better and seeing, it's I think it's a nice case of like when we try to make a film that's like politically right or socially impactful, you're kind of starting from the end, like that can't be the goal. The goal has to be something that's purer.
Yeah, it's like a consequence, not the goal. And you were mentioning it, but could you tell us a little bit more about the starting point of the film and how you begin with all the creative process of this film?
Yeah, it's a strange and circular process for me. I really will just like interrogate things that I'm fascinated by until it starts to congeal into something that feels like it could have the form of a film. For this one, early on, there was the idea of being like haunted by my childhood in the suburbs, watching television about growing up in the suburbs, and the way that my own memories of being a young person and sort of like believing in like the magic of life was so constructed by the things I was watching on television about what life should have felt like. And now looking back on that in this moment, 30 years later, as I was sort of like in an existential sense leaving home in a way that I would not be able to return, in terms of just transitioning. I was getting estranged from my family, and it was very clear to me that decision meant, you can't go home again, essentially. But I was thinking a lot just about that place where I grew up and the ways in which I was looking for myself as a young person in that place, and the ways that my memory of growing up and like the mythologies of one's childhood and adolescence and coming of age had sort of like all mixed in my mind, so that like it was impossible to untangle like my perspective on my own youth from what I learned from television. There was then also this idea of a TV show that was canceled. I loved television growing up, and like the characters in the film, I really like put a lot of myself emotionally into television, and it was almost this like lifeline because I was so dissociative and so unengaged in my own body and like reality that week to week, I just, it was like, I can't wait for the next episode of Buffy or Twin Peaks or The X-Files or whatever. And there was this idea of like a TV show that gets canceled and ends in this unresolved, terrible way, and that is this like psychic wound that the characters carry with them to the point where it almost feels like the pain and unresolved nature of the show's cancellation is like in their own body. This idea I had very early on, and I think from there it became this, the TV show ending with the characters being buried alive and understanding like that metaphor, or not necessarily metaphor, but that as the characters in my film being somehow connected to these fictional characters who are buried alive. And I had another film idea that I had been working on about a person returning to their hometown and there being all kinds of weird static creatures there, and it all just kind of combined. It'd be too long to map it out, and there were versions of this film that I had like outlined that bear no resemblance to what the final film ended up being, but that were trying to conjure a similar idea.
Because when I was listening to you in the Q&A the other day and listening to you now, these are like things that are really close to memories and feelings, and that I can relate to, because I was a kid like that too, like feeling like TV was like a safe space and feeling that sadness was something was ending or something like that. And I would like you to tell us a little bit more about how you pass those feelings and memories to a script, and how was the writing process of everything, because I can relate to like like a feeling, but then when you have to write it, I guess it must be like difficult.
And fun. I think it was a really fun challenge, to kind of like conjure ghosts, to conjure the past, to be playing in the space of like memory of my own childhood, but also memory of the media and aesthetics of my childhood, and then obviously like drawing lots of influence from other artists who influenced me. I think with this film specifically, and knowing that I was making something that was trying to conjure, this like childhood that I don't remember a lot from childhood, actually, and probably because I was quite dissociative, like it was almost like a scavenger hunt into my subconscious. I had this recurring dream in the year that I was first developing the film, and the dream was about this actual place in my hometown. In the high school, there was the football field, and then there was this, and the football field, it was like there was the track, and I would walk on the track, and it was just like a place that I went a lot. It was like a landmark in my hometown. But then in the far end behind the football field, there was this sort of short decline. And then there was this other field that I think had like a baseball diamond, but it wasn't really used. It was kind of like overgrown and weeds. And I kept having this dream about that field behind the field. And I was like, why am I dreaming about this? And it was somewhat clear to me that like, my subconscious was trying to tell me something about like, there are the places that you remember really clearly. There are like the landmarks, but then there are the things underneath the landmarks or behind, the hidden, more oblique, these like darker spaces. And I do think this became like an ethos for me, was like, I want to conjure those spaces. I think that like especially American films about the suburbs and about the suburbs of one's youth in the last 30 or 40 years, like our language for talking about that cinematically has become very just overdone, like it's Steven Spielberg, it's like kids on bicycles and like and then like Stranger Things is like ripping off like J.J. Abrams, who was ripping off Steven Spielberg. It's like it's become so cliche and so like a copy of a copy of a copy that there are some sort of like signifiers of, the suburbs in the 90s or the 70s or whatever it is that just have been bled of their power, I think. They've just become like too cliche. And I set myself this goal of finding like the field behind the field. I remember when and I think I did just like meditate, literally. I would like sort of like meditate on it and really try to clear my head and remember things. One was like, I remember going with my mother to the high school back before I was in high school when I was just a child to vote on election night. And those machines, they were real with these levers that you pull with the candidate's name on it. And there was always this bake sale. And it felt so exciting, like Maddie says at the beginning of the film, to be going to this building at nighttime. It was like this event, this space had been transformed in this way. And that was just this like ritual. The inflatable planetarium, this is very surreal, but a real thing that they brought in every year to the school, and we would sit in there and look up at the stars. And so I was looking for these things that I hadn't seen done to death by Spielberg and everyone who's trying to make movies like that, but that still could be, if not universal, at least like hold some kind of signifying power that could bring you back to a place in a more visceral and emotional way. So I think it was just careful and diligent, like trying to stay true to that as the mission.
And about the characters, you made the decision to like focus a lot of the attention on Owen and not in Maddie. Could you please tell us about that decision and why was it?
I think they're foils for each other in some way. And while they're the central relationship in the film, kind of, it's really like about both of their relationships to the show. And they certainly, they form this relationship with each other, and Maddie makes this decision to come back to try to bring Owen with her. But in a lot of ways, it's like their bond is all about the third person in the room, which is the screen and this TV show that they both love and see something similar in. There's something kindred between them in their shared love of the show. But it's a film about like what you do with that. Like they both receive this signal pretty young that is essentially saying to them like the same thing, which is, you need to get out of this place and like look for what you're seeing on the screen. You need to make that your life. And they both understand that in an emotional way when they see that in childhood, but then they take two different paths. And Maddie's path is one of resilience and like sort of trusting in what seems crazy about like this thing that she says, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. She's essentially saying like, we both know the same thing, which is that show, we need to save ourselves by like returning to that space. And Owen chooses obviously repression and denial and refuses to see himself. I wrote this movie. I had been on hormones for like 2 or 3 months. I had come out the previous year to myself and then to people in my life. I was really trying to make something that could be very, very honest to not like the experience of transition, but to the experience of like getting to a place where you're ready to start transition. Like, cause I remember my first appointment for HRT for hormones and just feeling like there were so many versions of my life where I never even got here. And even though this is like what is thought of in traditional sort of like transition narratives as the beginning, what about that half of my life or, at that point, my entire life that had brought me there? And I was like, that's plenty for a movie. We don't need to see Owen, become like the beautiful person that maybe someday he can become. We need to just let him see himself, and that if the whole movie can express how hard won something like that is, then I think I've made something truthful. So that was sort of the emotional idea I was working with, and so then Owen and Maddie kind of become foils, or two sides of the same question of how to deal with knowing that there's something inside yourself that needs to change, but not wanting to face it because it would be really difficult.
And there is something which is the outside world of Owen and Maddie, which is always like there, but we don't really see it, and they talk about it, and how important was for you to show that they had like an outside world, like family problems and stuff like that, and how did you work on that, because it's really subtle, but it is there. So
yeah, it's always a careful balance in my work. I was even more cautious with it with my first film, with We're All Going to the World's Fair, which I set really strict rules for myself in that film about like what we would and wouldn't see outside of, this was a film about people who were watching and recording themselves, and there's a point about, I think, even like 20 or 30 minutes into that movie where we leave the like omniscient third-person camera perspective on our character. Like we no longer have a privileged view of the character. We do for a little while. We get to see her when she's not being watched, but at a certain point, even and you wouldn't notice it until you watch the film a second time, but we lose that and we never get it back. And I was very conscious of, in that film, like every moment where I was telling you something about wider context in this person's life was not only like crucial, but also like cheap in some way, or dangerous narratively, in that like if you see that character at school being bullied or not having friends, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's why everything that's happening is happening. It felt like this careful tightrope of ambiguity. The more you leave oblique about like the expository external reasons for something, the more you leave it up to the viewer to sort of confront the internal emotional feelings that the characters are going through. And I think I was trying to do something similar in this film, in just like, because I think where this impulse comes from is a place of like I didn't want to make it. I was trying to talk about something, like internal and something that was horror from inside rather than outside, and if you make it, the more you make it like, oh, and Owen's parents are crazy Christians, and they raised him to be ashamed of sex or something. It's like all of a sudden it almost lets you emotionally off the hook of needing to understand what's going on internally. Like the father, for instance, in this film, he really isn't really a character. He's almost like a visage, in the corner. But he has one line in the movie, and he says, "Isn't that a TV show for girls?" It's this like very subtle installation of shame, and I think the idea I was trying to work with this film wasn't like, and look at these special circumstances that caused this particular case of repression, and more like just like soft power, the power of conformity, the power of shame, the power of repression as this like ecosystem that can cause a lot of damage in very subtle ways. And in this particular case, it's a movie about how like something as subtle as that can steal decades from someone's life.
And you create like this unique and really particular like universe, like visual universe, and you were saying that you were trying to not underline everything, not say anything, but just show it, and everything is full of references, like cinema references, musical references. So I would like you to tell us about how did you work on that and how free you felt to create wherever you wanted to create.
I mean, it was so fun. And especially because I had a budget, and which I've not always had. And there are drawbacks to having a budget in many ways, and there were things that I discovered and I think kind of knew going in, but then really knew as I was making it, that you have to give up when you have a budget and when you have a big crew. And I think the main thing on this film that I knew I was giving up was like that I had on my first film, which was much smaller and was like 10 people in the woods making a movie, was making that film. I could be like Anna, our lead actor, after production one day was doing tarot card readings, and I was like, okay, tomorrow we're just going to take the first half of the day and scrap this scene, and just Anna's going to like do tarot card readings for the camera. And I like, it's my favorite part of the movie in many ways. You can't really do that when you have like the infrastructure, you know, when there are Teamsters around and, you know, just different departments. And yeah, you can't quite do this. You can still try to capture lightning in a bottle, but you have to do it within the like plan a little bit more. But what you do get with a budget is the ability to like build worlds, you know, and in many ways I think of this film as like pictures that I got to paint. You know, it's not animated, but it has this feeling of like, oh, we can kind of construct these beautiful tableaus that you just wouldn't be able to without a budget, and both in terms of like production design and just like the aesthetics, but also like getting to work with CGI artists was so fun and weird. They all really want to make it look like Marvel. But they kept making the mistake of showing me their like early renderings when it looked like bad, like kind of bad, or like it looked like Lawnmower Man, like it looked like the early '90s CGI, and I kept being like, bring it back to that, you know, just like making things that felt striking and visceral and emotional and evocative on just like a purely aesthetic level, you know, and visually and sound and music. Like that's just such a huge part of the joy of the medium and part of my process. And it's funny because like all of those things, they don't really start to shine until even after you've locked picture. And so like the editing process for me is so much about like leaving a lot of space and giving, I think the whole filmmaking process is just like giving yourself a gift in the future. You know, writing the script, I'm just going to write in that there's a song that happens here, so then I can like find a great song, and that's going to be really fun. Or like this, you know, image is going to be a crazy thing that I know I will like have the excitement to bring to life. And yeah, I think it's the next project that I'm working on. I really want to like merge both. That's like one of my big creative goals is like, I've written it so that there is more of an intimacy and more of like a space just for like human lightning in the bottle, kind of like not necessarily improvisational, but like looseness, but then also continuing to construct these like bigger, yeah, tableaus that are so much like the pleasure of the medium.
And I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more about the actual references and your universe, which is,
Yeah, I think it's like, I've always liked what I liked, you know, and even from like the youngest age, this is where the chalk drawings in the movie come from, is in like kindergarten, I was just drawing these like scribbly pictures of like witches and ghosts and shit, and my teachers were like, Jane's like a little trouble, you know, like Jane might grow up to be trouble, and they were right. But I've always like been drawn to like this particular, I think like queer, nocturnal, gothy aesthetic. I like things that are like tinged with horror, but not necessarily like just because they're trying to scare you. Like there's something like romantic about those tones for me. So I think I just always gravitated towards things that carried that imagery. Like some on this film, the Smashing Pumpkins were a really big one. The Melancholy and Infinite Sadness album art and the music videos, and just this like kind of like gothic, romantic, suburban nighttime world. I was like, if we can like make a movie that feels like that, then it'll hit the mark. You know, obviously Lynch, obviously Cronenberg, obviously Gus Van Sant's, you know, like a teenage death trilogy. And then obviously 90s television. There was this idea to like conjure, to sort of like take the aesthetics that I loved and just felt like so like it was like in my DNA because I just grew up on it, you know, from like Buffy or Nickelodeon TV shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark or Pete and Pete or Goosebumps, to like take this sort of schlocky but very colorful, almost like Yeah, and one that Eric and I talked about a lot were like the Joel Schumacher Batman movies, just like the craziest colors. To like take that imagery and then like sort of transplant it or merge it with more of like an art film vernacular, so that you're almost looking at this like beautiful Gregory Crewdson-esque composition, but there's like a latex monster in the middle of frame, you know? Yeah, and just like I did a similar thing in my first film with like merging lo-fi, like YouTube internet aesthetics with like art film language. And I think like a funny thing happens when you try to take like high culture and low culture and smush them together. And I think I'm drawn to doing this because I grew up on pop culture and then found a lot of that other stuff later in life. But yeah, it either like hits or people are like, why did you do that?
We are going to open the questions. So we have a lot. One there, yeah, that one.
Hi. Long life, Buffy fan. Really enjoyed the film. I did have a question about how the character expressed how the memories of the show changed over time and how it didn't feel the same way as when they were watching him in their youth. What were you trying to say with that? What did you... I'm wondering.
What was I trying to say with that? Should I say? You know, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to tell you my interpretation of my own movie. It's a point in the movie where Owen is. I think we all can relate to this, right? Like looking through the prism at different points in life. And I think it's like one of the great pleasures of art. Honestly, is the way that like you can watch something that you loved so much in the same way that like when I go back to my hometown, the field I used to play in, I thought of as this like vast giant place. I was like, oh no, that's just like a backyard, a glorified backyard. You know, it was much smaller than I remembered it as. And yeah, for a film that's so much about memory, like it felt important to talk about that, to talk about like this show was imbued with like all of the romance of, you know, God, you know, like they saw magic in it. It was like where they first saw themselves. And in some senses, it's like absurd that was just this like kids TV show, you know, made on a budget probably as like a Canadian co-production. But you know, and this is sort of the point is that like it's not so much the show itself, and in fact, like by clinging to the show so didactically, Owen is trapping himself. It's more about like how the show felt. You know, this was something I would always say on set is like we're not trying to make a realistic movie about 90s television and how it actually looked. We're trying to conjure how it felt to watch at the time as a kid. But I think there's something else going on in that particular moment at the end when he's on the couch, which is he's just sort of, he's literally taken his father's place, right? Like we've seen his father throughout the movie lying there watching television in that same couch, same position. And Owen, as he tells us, like right before that scene, he's like, it was time for me to become a man. You know, I did it. And perhaps at that moment, he is like has fully internalized, even though his father has passed away, he's fully internalized his father's like doctrine. You know, he's no longer, he's lost the ability even to see the glimmer of who he really is, the magic in that show. He's just full dysphoria. He's full, you know, like he's rotting. And so I think what the key word in that scene is shame. He says, I just felt embarrassed. And I think it's that. It's like the feeling of, I think it's a feeling that as a trans person, you know very, very intimately, which is the way when I'm talking to somebody who sees me as disgusting, I know, versus when I'm talking to somebody who sees me as me. Queer people, any minority, I think walks around with this kind of psychic sense of themselves constructed by an external gaze. And in that point in the movie, that external gaze has such power over Owen that the thing that he found most beautiful now just feels embarrassing to him.
more questions.
I'll explain anything from the movie that you want.
Hi. Well, first, thank you for this beautiful, dark movie. I really liked it. I watched it 2 months ago in the US, and I've been thinking about it so much. And I think that's I don't know. I think there's like a few times in your life when you watch a film, and then you keep thinking about it, and it's like kind of like stuck in your mind. And I really want to thank you for that. And I would like you to ask you to like. I'm very curious of like the whole Pinko P universe, and I wanted to know why that title. Like it's like very specific, and I think it's very good. So I'm curious of that, and also like, how was the process of creating that universe in specific? Like your references, the whole tattoo on the neck, the characters, Mr. Melancholy, which I really like. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was fun. Yeah, that stuff is just like a treat because it's so pastiche, you know. And it's like it's like kid stuff for me. You know, it was like I lived and breathed that schlock growing up, so it was just like a pleasure to get to play in that kind of sandbox. The title, The Pinko P, is the name of a compilation album by the band The Cocteau Twins, an 80s band that I love. And my 30th birthday before I came out was Cocteau Twins themed. It said, "Come dressed as your favorite Cocteau Twins song," and only 2 people did it. And then my gay friend was like, "This is the gayest party a straight person has ever thrown." And I was like, I forget. I just liked that name, the Pinko P, and I was like, but this is a placeholder. I'll like come up with my own name for the show, and then I just couldn't come up with something better. And so it stuck. And then yeah, everything else in the show, it was like, I think it's always really important to me to not like to always like meet that at its level. Like there was a similar thing in my first film of like the central like online creepypasta game that the characters are playing. And it's like it would be so easy to just like make it stupid, because some of them are stupid. But like even when they're stupid, like you can still understand why people would love them. And it was very important to me to like. I just knew the entire film wouldn't work if I was looking down on the Pinko P from above, because then you wouldn't be able to understand like what Owen and Maddie saw in the show. So I just took my time and thought about like, yeah, the pastiches and tropes of like that particular kind of show, and you know, like borrowed some elements from some places, but others from my own, and then also tried to like, you know, there is this thematic thing happening, right, where it's like Isabel and Tara are each other's imaginary friends, and they live far from each other, but they communicate on the psychic plane, and they're trying to find each other again. And there is like an echo of the, you know, the sort of the themes of the movie that are coming out narratively in the show's plot. They're echoing each other, obviously. The tattoos, I was like, I think it was just written in the script as like a birthmark or something. There's always like a mystical birthmark, you know, Captain Planet stuff. What else? I mean, Mr. Melancholy. I was playing on George Méliès's Trip to the Moon, but also the Smashing Pumpkins music video for Tonight Tonight, which pays tribute to George Méliès's A Trip from the Moon, and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. It just like it all kind of formed itself. And then I was just like pulling very specific things from episodes of Buffy or Are You Afraid of the Dark that I loved. It was just fun. There was one moment when making a movie is like a nightmare, obviously. Scheduling is like a nightmare. And there was one moment when it appeared that the actors who played Isabel and Tara, we maybe weren't going to be able to get them on the same day. And I like, but then thankfully we did. But I had created this whole other mythology off of that, where like I was like, oh no, it actually could work. What if they were like from neighboring sleepaway camps on the opposite side of a lake, and they like each were on their own dock, and they were psychically talking to each other, and it's like Owen and Maddie and how they're finding each other, and we didn't have to do that. But I think it's like you create the thing emotionally that fits into the puzzle.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for being here and congratulations on the movie. It's just a tiny curiosity. I think we have read in the credits the name of Phoebe Bridgers and Emma Stone. Yeah, just for curiosity, what was their role on the movie and how did they end up in it? Thank you.
Well, Emma's not in the movie. Emma Stone was a producer on the film. After my first film, which I made for like $14, I was like, I want to make a movie for $15, you know, and Emma Stone and her husband Dave McCary had just started a production company and were trying to make the kinds of movies that I wanted to make, and they were like on a list of a bunch of people who I met with, and I really liked both of them, especially because they're both artists, and you know, like they had essentially said to me like, we just want to use our power. Like, this is Emma Stone. Like, we want to use her power to like help people like you make movies. And I was like, cool, I'll take your power. And I remember like I was in Dallas, Texas for a film festival, and I remember hanging up and like walking outside, and there was just like a billboard for Cruella, and I was like, that's crazy. I was just on Zoom with her. But she was great and so supportive, and like literally like got on all of the Zoom pitches, you know, and like having Emma Stone in the room advocating for you does help you seem like an adult and not a weirdo, to the degree that that's possible with me. And then Phoebe, that was an idea that I had always had because I loved her music from very early on, and she really felt like the person who would be playing on Buffy. You know, there's this thing in the movie of the double lunch, you know, where this double bill of bands plays each week. And obviously Twin Peaks does this, but like a lot of 90s shows did this. This was one of the like gifts I borrowed from 90s television, was that every week, like the gang on Buffy would go to the Bronze, or, you know, on Party of Five, they'd go to the Peach Pit, and there was always like the alt rock band playing like their new single in like whatever town the show takes place in. And so I knew I wanted to like give myself that gift, and I knew I wanted the movie to have this like teen angst soundtrack. And I'd always, yeah, dreamed about Phoebe writing a song for the movie and being a part of it, and that was cool.
Jump in just for one question, because you were mentioning the industry before, you were mentioning it now. Sorry. And you've spoken about this before, about how you learn to make films in school and how you've learned how films are made, like in this process. Could you tell us a little bit more about this, and how was your experience?
Bad. Pretty uniformly bad, honestly. Well, I love making movies, and I love all of the people I get to make the movies with. And then, like, capital is just like, you know, you have to trick them into letting you do it, and try to take advantage of them more than they're taking advantage of you, you know. I think I'm like pretty good at it. Like it sometimes feels like Game of Thrones, you know. It's really like political, you know, and especially making a movie at this level is incredibly political. Making this kind of movie at this level, like I knew that I was making a movie that was maybe going to be like pushing at the, you know, left of center of like what you're allowed to do in like a commercial infrastructure with a lot of billionaires' money on the line who don't share my values. And you know, and it's not a binary. There are like lovely people who are allies in that mission in the industry and in Hollywood, but like, make no mistake that it's like top level evil. uh, and I think I think because I'm like kind of a mischief maker, you know, and like even as a kid, I was like a class clown or just like there's like I enjoy it. I don't think every artist does, and nor do I think every artist has to, but I do enjoy like dancing with the devil in that way to try to like make something, because it's the art that I loved growing up, was like stuff that had managed to slip through pop culture and teach me something radical or seem genuine in some way, and so like being like, all right, I'm gonna like suffer for several years and then be really proud of hopefully the thing I like managed to force through. That was the experience, and I think it never really stops. You know, I was like in Toronto at a table with like just like some of the most legendary living filmmakers, you know, who are like in their 80s and making their like 30th movie, and they were complaining about how terrible this is too. You know, I don't think it goes away until, you know, like we have a better society that cares more about art and emancipatory, liberatory ideas getting out to the public rather than trash. So sorry, I wish I had a more hopeful answer.
No, it's okay. But don't you think that maybe you can like create your own way of doing, and in your future projects you can find a way of like working in cinema?
I think Hong Sang-soo does a good job, but he makes movies like in 5 days, and you know, it's just like a guy at a table drinking sake. To make this kind of movie, you need to dance with the devil, and I think the only way to make it easier on yourself is to care less and to make something that at its core doesn't share the values that I would want my movies to share. But it's fun also. I don't know. It's also like it's like I've just been in the most insane situation. You know, like when you see that top level, you know, David Lynch like parodies it in his work. Like when you get to Mulholland Drive, it's like very clear that he's just reflecting on this exact absurdity that like, you know, these shadowy figures, it's like it's real, you know, and like that's because like there's a certain level of money involved, and there is something like kind of fun about taking them for a ride, or, you know, like I get off on it a little bit.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for sharing all of this, and congrats on the film. I had a little bit more I feel like it's a follow-up question of what you're explaining right now, but basically, how much from the last draft of your script to the film we're seeing now, how much do you think like it's basically like, do you think like it follows like a how much has it gone far from like that script version? And I'm asking you this because I'm really super curious on like a lot of people in this room, maybe, or me myself, we're gonna work or we're working with a producer, and there's this terrifying word called clarity, you know, that is like the money word. And I'm just wondering if you could actually, like, if the script is really close to what we're seeing, and you could go with that script, or it had to be a little bit more, you know, normal, and then you could play more with edit.
I mean, I definitely played with the edit, but I do, and certainly there were moments when like I was feeling like pressure to do things, or, you know, take notes or consider things that felt wrong, you know, emotionally and intrinsically, and in those cases, like, you just fight those battles one by one, hopefully elegantly. But then there were tons of ways that like the movie got better in the edit creatively, and many of those were like studio notes. Like I got really good studio notes. I had a very similar experience with my first film, which is that like I think clarity is an interesting word. I kind of like clarity. Like I want my movies to have clarity to some degree. I don't want them to be simple, but I find because I make films that are like deeply ambiguous, or that are like trying to leave the viewer with a lot to like ponder or question or interrogate, I found that like there is a limit, or there's like a threshold that like is a very fine line or tightrope to walk of like too much ambiguity makes people just go like, I don't care. And too much clarity makes people go home and do something else. And the right, on World's Fair, it was like so much about like how many things can I leave ambiguous. And on this film, I think the biggest changes in the edit from the script were about, were structural, were about like the timelines. Like the script version of this film started like it starts, but then it jumped to the present day and you like spent some time with Owen as an adult, and then it jumped back to high school, and then it jumped forward to adulthood. And there was like a point in the edit when I realized that it was a studio note, and a great studio note, that like it was too much, like because I was making you question reality and making you like keep up with this like hyper complex like fractured time narrative, and it was too much. Like when I finally was like, okay, let's like experiment with, 1996, 1998, 2000 and 2009, just like watching the film linearly time-wise, even though obviously there's still all kinds of wonky things going on with time and reality. Something did open up, and it became something that was like penetrable. And so I think it's always this fine line of like, yeah, it's a painful process because you as the artist have to be, like you've put so much emotional labor into the structure of the work, and your idea of it, and you need to just be able to be like, no, it doesn't work. Because when you have a script, you've not sat with somebody in a movie theater and watched the movie, and you really can't know what's gonna work until you do that. But other than that, I think the script is very true to the movie, and to, like there's nothing that like didn't end up in there that I wish did. And though I didn't technically have final cut, there was never a moment where like I was feeling like my film was being taken from me. It was really just like, it's just the soft pressure thing again. It's like, when people are like, what the hell is this? And you want to make something that people like.
We have time for 2 more questions, so maybe there, because he was, yeah.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for being here. Excuse my English, but I think it is such a cool meta joke, the fact that one of the characters of the movie is called Tara, and then the actress that used to play Tara is also in the movie. So I was curious about the fact, to know what was first, to naming the character Tara or to have the collaboration with the actress?
This, for those who don't know Buffy, is a Buffy reference. Amber Benson, who plays Johnny Link's mother in that one scene, she opens the door and gives Owen a hug, played a character named Tara on Buffy who dated the character Willow. They had the first on-screen gay kiss ever on network television, I believe. And then the Tara character was killed off in this sort of like tragic way that many felt was like sort of playing into this trope of like kill your gays, the like tragic like gay love story that has to end in tragedy. And has sort of remained like a sore point in Buffy fandom, to give you guys some geek backstory here. But I think also like one of the things that the film is reflecting on is like growing up, and I loved Buffy. It meant so much to me. Those characters all meant so much to me. Like I was heartbroken when that character died. But in recent years, like many things, from the past, there's been this reappraisal, and like a lot of the cast of Buffy have spoken out about the experience of making the show being like a really toxic environment, and just some clearly not great things happening under the surface, and that it's hard not to feel like some kind of tie to the way that that character and that relationship was treated on the show. And so this was idea or something I was thinking about when I was writing the movie was, yeah, feeling like, I was like, I want to bring Tara back to life, you know, even if just for like a scene. I think that would be graceful. I want like that grace to exist in this movie that's reflecting on like growing up in the 90s and looking and trying to find these like wisps of queerness on the screen. And so I guess technically first I wrote the script and named the character Tara, but then when we were making the movie, I was like, I really want to get Amber Benson, and I met Amber and she's amazing and was like so moved and hadn't acted in a few years, but like really wanted to come out and do it. And then I had to convince them to like, they're like, why do you want to like fly somebody from LA for like one scene? Like that's like a waste of money. And I was like, no, it's not. Like here's why. And just, yeah, same as always, just like some begging and trying to make your case. I had to do that with Fred Durst too. I was like, they were like, why do you want to cast Fred Durst? And I was like, okay, so let's talk about Woodstock 99 and it as the like origin of a certain kind of white male anger. Anyway, I like, you know, it's like post-structuralist. I like peppering the movie. Hopefully the movie doesn't depend. You don't need to know these things to feel emotional watching the movie, but I do like to pepper the movie with like I don't even think references is the right word. It's like letting the world and letting the people who are in the frame speak to something larger about the movie.
And I think, well, yeah, then one and the last one then. And, yeah.
Hola Jane, enhorabuena por la película y por...
Hi, Jane. Congratulations for being here for the movie. At the end of the day, you're giving vision to something that is very necessary. And I just wanted to know what you would tell those people that belong to the collective, who want to make movies and who want to tell stories like the one you told here today.
To trans people?
Uh,
Or just filmmakers with good taste, like me?
Trans people.
Gracias. What would I tell them? I don't know. It's definitely a specific kind of exhausting, especially when you're trying to make movies for this much money. Like as a trans person, I find that so many of the things that are like exactly what it's about for me are viewed as incorrect by like a more normative, like cis, male-dominated space. So I think one needs to be prepared going in to like understand and really have, I think you always as a filmmaker need to have a lot of faith in yourself. Faith is such a huge part of the process, because especially early on in one's career, because like you're going to spend years believing that, in this oblique way without much external validation, that like, you know, you're going to take some people's money and make something worthwhile out of it, creatively, financially, whatever. It just requires a lot of belief in oneself and also a lot of self-interrogation to make it actually worthy of that belief. And then I do think for trans folks, for any minority group, making work in a commercial system, like, and especially making work that's trying to like push at the bounds of what is acceptable in that commercial system, yeah, I think you need to surround yourself with loved ones. Like I last year moved out of New York City and moved upstate, and just like found myself a community, like a queer family of like farmers and communists and, you know, like people who have nothing to do with this world. And that's been so important for me, having like emotional stability outside of the work that I do when I go to Hollywood and try to convince them to let me make my next movie. It's just about sustaining yourself and not burning out. And I think trans people understand this intrinsically. It's like we deal with that every day. It's just, this is like a heightened version of that. And then I think the other thing is just like, and this is just like a political belief, and like the point is, the point of being trans, it's like, it's not, you know, it's not purely identitarian, it's like, it's political. It's like saying, I believe that a world can be constructed in a different way, you know, where like the boundaries of what is and isn't allowed can change. And so like, I feel constantly this like assimilationist pressure in Hollywood, right? It's like the path of, especially queer voices, is to like, let's like make ourselves palatable and understandable to normative society. And that just feels like gentrification. And so I think it's like staying really true to that, you know, as you make work, and trying to, yeah, just like, even if I'm working within a system, that doesn't mean I like support the system, I suppose. And I would encourage other filmmakers to like keep that in mind.
So I think this is like a great idea to finish with. Thank you very much for coming, for being here, for presenting here the film. And yeah, we hope to see you with your next projects in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.